Hello everyone, and welcome to this video which is in our Great Engine Endgame series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler, and we're taking a look at a stunning ending played by Revenge as black against Invictus white in the TCEC Season 22 Swiss 3. What is this position? Well, white is a pawn up here, extra h pawn on h3, but it's clear that black has some serious compensation here. First of all, due to the weak dark squares in white's position, there are plenty of sensitive squares covered at the moment, but d2, f4, that are really asking for black pieces to land on them. What you've also got are these very passive pieces here: knight on b2, bishop on c2, restricted by all those pawns on light squares, and the rook on b1. So yeah, I mean, for the pawn, black's got a lot of dark squares to aim at, and also more active pieces. One little thing that's threatened is the pawn on a5, so black's got to think about that. But yeah, it's not actually clear how black should proceed here. What Revenge did was surprising and actually very strong as well. So Revenge played the move knight h4 check, and well, Invictus decided that it was too risky to leave the knight on h4 there, and decided to give up the bishop pair, swap off a pair of rooks, and then offer the exchange of the other pair of rooks. Now, you know, this is an opposite coloured bishop ending, of course. So in general, you know, if we swap off the rooks with rook takes d1, then we're just assuming that you know, the position is just equal. But you're more sort of thinking, really, you know, well, you know, black's a pawn down, but you know, there's no way that that white can make any progress. As it turns out, though, it's not about you know, white being a pawn up, but unfortunately not being able to make progress. It's all about black, despite being a pawn down, just yeah, really being able to push white for the win. So rook b8 was played, and you know, this is very sensible. The black rook is more active than the white rook, and it's targeting this this passive knight on b2. And this is really a crucial moment. Now, in the engine games that that I played between Stockfish and Komodo, you won't be surprised to hear that Stockfish and Komodo were always managing to draw this as white. How were they doing that? Well, this was the first crucial moment, and here they were really trying to play super actively. So knight to d3 here. Now, if you go knight d3, bishop takes d3, rook b2, check, king f3. This is not such an easy one to assess. You know, is this really? Is it better to keep the rooks on, or to exchange off the rooks? After all, this king can get into a bit of trouble. But it does seem basically that you know, activating the rook in this way, it gives you possibilities to check the king, to attack these pawns. You know, this gives white a lot more counterplay than in the game. Yeah, the really surprising thing, of course, is that you actually need that counterplay. Knight takes c4 was another idea, and here again you see this is a game Dragon against Stockfish, and here again you see Dragon playing very, very actively. c4, knight c5, king f7, rook d7 check, bishop e7, and rook c7, and yeah, just very, very difficult indeed for black to get things moving. We've got knight d7 to e5 check, lots of threats against the king as well, and it's very hard to advance this c pawn. Certainly not trivial to draw this, but you know, Dragon or Stockfish with white were able to do so. But Invictus didn't see the danger, and, well, I can't really blame it, because I didn't see it either. Played rook b1, and after king e7 played knight d3, which is tremendously natural. I mean, you're just basically saying, taking the opportunity here to swap off the rooks, offer the exchange of knights, and just head for a drawn endgame. Well, rook takes b1 check was played, bishop b1, and king d6. And amazingly enough, this is the crucial moment, probably the last moment that white could manage to hold the draw, despite being a pawn up in an opposite coloured bishop ending. Really quite amazing. We'll have a look first of all at what happened in the game, and then afterwards we'll come back to this moment, because I think this moment will make much more sense once you've seen what happened in the game. So here white played the move a4. The idea of this move is simply to put the pawn on a square that can be defended by the bishop. It does restrict the light squared bishop a bit as well, but well, we're just claiming that opposite coloured bishop ending, what can possibly go wrong there? But here Revenge played knight takes d3, bishop d3, king e5, and its evaluation was very, very high, and basically pretty much every game that Stockfish and Komodo played in my engine games ended up as a win for black here. What is the enormous problem? The enormous problem is that this king is threatening to come into d4, c3 and b3 and pick up the a pawn. Now if you pick up the a pawn, that's a very hard pawn for white to stop, simply because this light square bishop is so restricted. You know, often, you know, it would be better if white lost this c pawn, because you could have some sort of remote defences, you know, maybe target the black e6 pawn as well along the a2 g8 diagonal. But yeah, with all these barriers in the way, white finds it very, very hard to deal with that a pawn. So, you know, ideally white would want to get the white king to c2. If it can do that, then well, white could maybe give up the c pawn, somehow keep hold of the a pawn, and well, then there's no danger whatsoever, because the king on c2 blocks the passed c pawn. But you're going to see it proves to be unbelievably difficult for the white king to get across to the queen side. So king f3, king d4, and now bishop e2 was played by Invictus. Now king e2 would be a nice move, but then we play king c3, and after king e3, now the funny thing was that in the game between Dragon and Stockfish that I played on my hardware, Stockfish took forever before doing anything, obviously trying to get the most optimal way of taking the pawn. But king b3 already is very, very strong here, and we're just going to take on a4, come back, move the pawn to a3, and then just use that as a decoy and pick up all the rest of white's pawns. So what Invictus did was to play the move bishop e2. Now this is actually, I didn't understand this move at all, but it's actually a very subtle idea and a really good defensive attempt. What happens if you play the simple king c3? Well, I mean, first of all, you know, white does have the possibility of playing bishop d1 to defend the a pawn if necessary. That's one possibility. But the main idea in actual fact is to play the move g5 here. And after bishop takes g5, we play e5. King b3, we go bishop d1 check to defend the a pawn, king e4, and king e4 here. And the idea is that having played g5, we've now freed the bishop to get active and actually just win this pawn on e6. And this proves to be a very good defence against the advance of the c pawn. After king c3, bishop g4, c4, bishop e6. It's one of those really peculiar things in opposite coloured bishop endings that you know, a bishop attacking a passed pawn from behind can really cause difficulties to advance it, because if you play king b3, which is the move you'd really want to play, well, then the c pawn is pinned, so can't advance anyway. So yeah, very, very difficult for black to make any progress here. So g5 is a really great resource, and that explains a move that I hadn't really understood before I started analysing this endgame. It looked like a generally good move, but I didn't really understand why it was necessary at this point. And that's the move bishop g5, and you can see what it's doing, stopping g4 to g5 from happening, and also stopping the white king from coming over to the queen side. And so it's you know, we're going to start again giving the king a free run to attack the queen side pawns. And of course, if this white king can't get over to the queen side, then actually even winning the c pawn is going to be fine for black, because the king won't be able to assist the bishop. So in this position, Invictus played the move e5, which is pretty natural, just trying to free some light squares for the bishop. King c3, king f2. Yeah, king f2 felt a little bit odd. I mean, I looked at a couple of things here. I mean, king e4 felt more natural, king b3, bishop d1 check, king c4, but although the king looks more active on e4, it still, you know, can't get back to the queen side with king e3. So black's just going to go king c3, c4, and then move the king out of the way and queen the pawn, and the king is just completely caged there all the time. I mean, I also looked at giving up some pawns with h4 and g5. You know, I can free access to the g4 square by force. The only big problem here is that okay, you know, black's picking up the e pawn, but you know, black can easily cover the advance of white's e pawn, and of course black's now got an extra pass pawn on the g file. So you've got a pass pawn on both sides of the board. That's too much for white to cope with. And in actual fact, white can't even, you know, win the e6 pawn without dropping the a pawn. So that's 3 pass pawns spread out all over the board, just impossible for white to hold back. So after king c3, Invictus played king f2, king b4, bishop d1, king c4. And again, it's the same problem as we saw with the white king on e4. You know, how do you get the king across and stop black from playing c4 to c3? Simply, you can't. King e1 was played, king b4, bishop c2, bishop f4, bishop takes c5, just grabbing a pawn, king e2, bishop g3, bishop f4, heading back to the diagonal. You've won a pawn, and now you've stymied those 2 pawns. The bishop can go back to g5 or to h6, cut off the white king, and now we're going to advance the c pawn and also advance the e pawn as well. So king f3, bishop g5, bishop d1, king c3. Invictus gave up there. Bishop e2, c4, king e4, king b3, bishop d1, king b2, and the c pawn just rolled all the way. So that was really, really impressive. I mean, I was just amazed that you know, the position here after king e5, actually the position after a4, you know, an opposite coloured bishop ending where the knight's getting exchanged, you know, that this was just turning out to be absolutely winning for black. I haven't seen this sort of sorcery too often. There's Lubojevic against Karpov game, where Karpov also won one of these opposite coloured bishop endings, but that's the closest thing I've seen to this one. So how could white have defended better? Actually, it's pretty subtle, it has to be said. The key thing is to go knight b2 in this position, bishop g5, a4, bishop c1, and now you go knight d3. And the key difference here is that black's got the same position, really, as in the game, only the bishop is not on h4, the bishop is on c1. You've forced black to reach further in order to force the exchange of knights. And the problem with having the bishop on c1, it's not a bad square, but it's not holding back the white kingside pawns in the same way. And, well, I mean, white's threatening to play the king over to the queen side, and is going to gain a tempo on the bishop c1 on the way. And if you go g5, for example, king f3, king e2, king d1, king c2, and there we are. You know, we're completely safe there. The thing that I wanted to play, of course, was not this g5 move, but to play the move king e5. But then there's quite a few ways of doing it. But h4, bishop b1, king c3, and now e5 is a key resource. And what's the idea? The idea is if you go king b3, it looks like you're winning the a pawn. Then white can actually go bishop f5, and again you see this drawback to having the bishop on c1. The pawn on h4 has taken away the g5 square from the bishop, and if you go ef, e6 is just winning for white. So king a4, we go bishop e6, and still there's this threat of bishop d7, e6 to e7. So, I mean, black has to spend some time covering this e pawn, and then white plays g5 and is threatening to create another pass pawn. You know, just it's just not going to be winning for black, this position. So yeah, I mean, it's a very, very subtle thing indeed. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's this is only something that you could possibly work out with a lot of time, and I think, you know, one of the main things would be stepping over your sort of lazy assumptions that this sort of ending for white is just a draw. But no, after takes king e5. Just a win for black, just because the white bishop is so restricted, and because black has the possibilities of with king and bishop to both hold back any freeing attempts from the white pawns to you know, free some squares for the light square bishop, and also to shoulder away the white king from defending the pawns. Really a very impressive endgame from Revenge, and it assessed it, you know, really beautifully as well. So yeah, really impressive play there.